Okay, moving on, thank you.
Right, we're going to move next to the standard of care rule. The bulk of the comments were received around this rule, so we'll be here for a little while. First, you'll recall that in the rule there was an initial provision for the physician to be gathering the information. And one of the comments that we received had to do with the documented review of the patient's current medication to identify possible drug interactions, including benzodiazepines and opioids. And we had a comment that, you know, to take out the calling out of benzodiazepines and opioids. That language was included at the specific request of our physician panel. And Dr. Mitchell and Dr. Swain may have some comments here, but my understanding of their recommendation is that we don't really have the evidence about drug interactions with all types of drugs, but have some information with benzodiazepines and opioids, and that's why those were included. Certainly other drugs could be part of that, but those were called out specifically for that reason.
Comments there?
I think it's a great idea to offer warnings, but from a neurochemical standpoint, it doesn't make any sense for these two in particular. I mean, cannabinoids are not CNS depressants or stimulants, but at least to point out that we have some basic evidence that some of these things might have some odd interactions, unexpected interactions, I think is brilliant, really, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. On our next provision, this had to do with documenting review that standard medical treatment had been attempted or considered, and there were several conditions put on, you know, that had to be met also, that the patient had inadequate treatment response to the standard medical treatment, that the patient was unable to tolerate the standard medical treatment, or that it was not appropriate in that particular patient for other documented reasons. And I believe that this was also discussed quite a bit in December in front of this committee. We received a number of comments that those conditions should be eliminated and that the language should be just documented review that standard medical treatment has been attempted or considered, period. And I know our physician members may have some comments there too. That initial piece did come from our physician panel, but I think we are comfortable making that streamlined change, understanding that there may be times where, you know, a standard medical treatment may not be needed at the outset.
Thoughts on that? Leaning on my physician colleagues in case we want to have anything to say. We're good?
Well, I personally don't have any problem with that language. In fact, I actually feel strongly that there needs to be documentation of a discussion about known therapies that have scientific evidence that work. On my hat as an oncologist, one of the things that drives me a little bit crazy is people eschewing standard treatments that have known cure rates for things that don't, with no discussions by the providers that are advocating the non-standard treatment. And I feel that's important.
Other comments? Okay, thank you.
Okay, our next item dealt with, there is a statutory provision that indicates that the recommendation can include any instructions on the use of medical marijuana as determined by the physician. That's in the statute. So the way we had it drafted in the rule, it indicated that the recommendation shall include any instructions from the physician. And we received comments on both sides of this. We received a number of comments from physicians indicating that they would be more comfortable if there were specific dosing requirements. And then we received comments on the other end of it that it actually sets up physicians for some legal liability more around, the federal prohibition and, the Conant v. Walters case, that should not be required. And so we reviewed all of that information. It is in the statute that allows for a physician to include any instructions as determined by the physician, but I think that we are comfortable taking that out of the rule and just not having it in the rule. I think when I went back and looked at the rule, it looked like it was mandatory, and that was not the intent. So I think that we are comfortable taking it out, but it does remain in the statute.
And I'd like to clarify too, in looking at the way it was brought in the first place, I think it was part of the requirement for what a recommendation may contain. And so the medical marijuana patient registry, we're envisioning that the field will be in there if the physician so chooses to use it. What Kim's saying is just not making it mandatory.
But does it open the physician up into any legal liability should they decide to fill out that field?
I think certainly physicians would need to consult with their own attorneys on this issue, but I think the more specific dosing requirements, the more you treat it like a prescription,
Mm-hmm.
I think the more likelihood that there could be some liability there.
Is there, if we make it mandated, in other words, don't delete the line, do we give them some cover?
I don't think it does because of the interplay with state and federal law.
Too bad. That's going to discourage physicians.
I understand.
Other
The
comments?
deletion of the line will discourage physicians?
Well, if they feel as though, the patient sitting there, I think in reality, the patient's going to turn to their prescriber and say, could you give me some indications on how much I need to take, how I should use it?
Yes.
Because they probably don't, my guessing, they don't have a history of using it. The physician will feel compelled to give them that information. And all of a sudden now they've placed
That would be the
themselves-
normal relationship between a
would be.
patient and a physician.
Yes, and a very good idea, I think. If the line is deleted, the physician may just simply say something and then become liable, or say nothing and feel as though they're not treating their patient maybe fairly or completely. It's a difficult line they're going to have to walk, or contact their lawyer, their legal representative, before they tell the patient how to use the medical marijuana. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a tricky issue for physicians. We all have DEA licenses, which are federal, or most of us have DEA licenses, which are federal, and none of us want to lose that. And I think the more latitude we're given will give us more ability to consult with our own attorneys and make our own judgments.
Now, this might be where the clinical advisor at the dispensary could play a role. The physician can simply say, go talk to them, or the person who's dispensing. They have the education that they might offer you to, not as a clinician with a DEA license, just as somebody who understands how to use it. They could go back to the dispensary. Well, they're going to go there anyway.
So a comment there that we have a subcommittee of the pharmacy board who was continuing to work on our 90-day supply rule. And when we received word that medical would be taking this out and that the clinical director role was also going to be eliminated from rule, that caused us to pause and have to say we're going to probably have to be a little bit more detailed in our information we're bringing forward on the 90-day supply so that we can help in absence of a clinical director or physician mandate to give guidance to the dispensary, the individuals actually doing the dispensing at the pharmacy or at the dispensary itself, to help in this space. So I think you'll see that come forward. I think that's fair to say, Aaron. That's kind of the approach that we took to give that guidance. So where we don't need to do it by rule, but we will do it by information that we will continue to update and make available to the dispensaries to help kind of cover some of those gaps.
So just to kind of close the loop on that conversation, I don't pretend to have any understanding of exactly what it is for you as physicians to be interacting with your patients generally, but my experience in talking to physicians who practice in states where they have significant experience in this area is that, in the kind of interplay with the Conant v. Walters decision, is that it gives them the ability, the freedom to have these discussions with their patients without feeling that there is a mandate from them, from a regulatory framework, to have to include certain information that does cause them jeopardy. Because the freedom of speech dynamic is what really comes out of that Collin v. Walters decision that provides them that protection to have such discussion about that could be as granular as dosing and things like that, without having to then memorialize that on something that would be a de facto prescription.
Oh, so this isn't closing their mouth?
No.
No.
It's just taking the requirement and not putting the requirement that they put instructions in the recommendation.
Other thoughts there? Okay, we'll move ahead.
All right. Still in the standard of care rule, this is on the section that talks about under certain circumstances, the physician could terminate the recommendation or decline to issue a new recommendation if a patient was coming in for, that once a year point. And the language was the physician had concerns that the patient or caregiver is abusing or diverting the medical marijuana. The comment we received is that concerns is too vague and overbroad and will cause physicians not to be interested in doing this. I think we do understand that comment, but we also do want to allow physicians to have that interaction, and if they're seeing abuse or diversion, to share that information through the patient registry so that the patient won't be able to continue, receiving the medical marijuana. If there's an abuse or diversion issue, we want the physician to deal with it. So, so we changed the language to say, based on the physician's clinical judgment, the patient or caregiver is abusing or diverting the medical marijuana. So that puts it back into, not just a vague concern, but the physician's clinical judgment, which they should be using all the time.
Okay.
I
Comments
think
or
your
questions?
language
Yeah.
is an improvement.
Thank you.
I would agree. Okay, thank you.
All right, and then one more, standard of care. We received a number of comments from physicians requesting more detail regarding the annual report. And we talked with you about this last month. We want to have more detail regarding the annual report, but we are still gathering information. So for now, we want to leave this rule the same. We are looking at other state, we're looking at Minnesota, which is really the only other state that has this requirement. And we're looking at the surveys that Minnesota uses. We'll be talking with our board about that at our next board meeting. So we're starting to, try to get some information around this, but we're not ready to make any changes to the rule at this time. And if any of the committee members have feedback on this particular issue, we are still continuing to be open to that. We want to get this one right without being too prescriptive, but still getting information that's valuable for the program.
Comments or questions? Okay.
Okay, we're ready to move on to our petition rule. And so just as a refresher, anybody can file a petition to add a qualifying condition, and the medical board is required to review those petitions, and there's a whole laundry list of things that the medical board has to consider with respect to those petitions. So what we have tried to do in the rule is to take those requirements that the medical board has to have to consider the petition and require the petition to have that information. I think the idea that anybody can file a petition kind of makes it wide open, and we want to make sure that the petitions that we receive have enough information for the board to start their review process. We understand the board will need to, have expert review and do that on its own. But initially, we wanted to have the petitioners provide us with as much of that information as possible. So in that section, so what we're asking for the petitioners to provide, paragraph C5 has evidence that conventional medical therapies are insufficient to treat or alleviate the disease or condition. We received a few comments that that statement was an incorrect statement of the law. We went back and looked at it. The law says consideration of whether conventional medical therapies are insufficient to treat or alleviate the disease or condition. So we'll revert to that language rather than evidence. And so that's a point well taken, so we will make that change.
Committee, comments or questions? Okay.
And then the next section, this deals with what the board has to consider in reviewing the petition. And there was also an objection to that same criteria. The board shall consider whether conventional medical therapies are insufficient to treat or alleviate the disease or condition. That's a statutory requirement, so we feel like we need to leave that in there. So we're recommending no